Hey team, how are you? So the question we're posing today is, what's the purpose of life? And this is a really interesting question because a lot of people have different meanings for life, different stories for their lives, different ways of interpreting why they exist. And I'm fascinated by this question. It's probably one of the most important questions a human should really ask and answer for themselves. And I've been pondering and contemplating and trying to figure out the answer myself. And I'm trying to understand the answer. So I'm just going to give you the reasoning that I've got so far, what I've concluded so far. And I'd certainly love your take on it, perhaps in the comments below, or some direct feedback. But the point is this: first and foremost, I believe that our existence on planet Earth is more than three-dimensional. We recognize there's the dimension of length and width, and then we recognize the dimension of depth as well. But I think there's more than three dimensions that exist in our universe. And so what I see the human being is two states in the person of one physical entity, and those states are being the spiritual being and the human being as well. And what I see is that we are the human being linked to matter, to physicality, and then we are the spiritual being, which is related to our thoughts. And if you reflect, where do thoughts come from? How do they materialize? How do they exist? And what I'm saying is that I believe thoughts come from a higher dimension, and they operate at that dimension, and they disseminate into our existence while we're attached to matter. So for me, thoughts basically drive the physical. So thoughts are a higher level than the physical, the material, and they drive the physical. And so if you can basically manage your thoughts, then you manage yourself, you manage your actions, you manage your physical entity as a human being. Now, as far as thoughts are concerned, I believe thought is energy, and that the human being is basically, if you construe the human being as being mechanical, like a machine, and it has levers to make it do things, push and pull levers to make things happen physically, then what I believe is a human being, metaphorically speaking, has psychological levers that thought basically is utilized to move, press and push. So thought is energy. What we think is who we are, and the actions that we transmit out, because the thoughts push the psychological levers. And so it's the development of thought that I think is fundamental. Then the question is, what's the meaning of life? Why do we exist? Well, I believe, from my conclusions on my thinking, is that we're spiritual beings. We're pure energy, pure thought, pure potentiality, and we're in the shell, trapped, some would argue, but I would say challenged to be in the human form, in the human shell, and use our thought to maneuver and experience physicality. And the spiritual being is only in the physical shell for a period of time. And so the purpose of life is for that spiritual being to transcend, to basically return back to a spiritual state while still being in the physical world, in the shell of the human being. So what does transcend mean? What is transcendence? So the idea of transcendence, if thought is energy, is to get to such a level of thought, to such a level of thinking, that you're able to detach yourself from the physical in your thought, and in that thought, when you detach, you ascend to the spiritual level, to the spiritual dimension. So you're still in the physical human body, but you've transcended. So the pain and pleasure of matter, which is the issue with matter, that it feels pain and pleasure, you're detached from, and you own, you navigate, and you control. So you determine, you decide, and that is called being present. When you get to such a level of flow, of elevated state, where you're connected directly to the spiritual, that everything is instinctual, you're enacting in intuitively, everything that you do, because you're at that level, then you're in a spiritual state, you're transcended. And so I think if you look at the example of the people that have transcended, they have been the spiritual teachers. You look at Jesus, Abraham, Moses, Krishna, Buddha, Muhammad, all these people, and many, many more that we know and not know of, have used their spiritual development, their evolved thinking, to transcend, to get to a state where they connect with the high dimension, and then they're able to pick up knowledge, wisdom, and they bring that knowledge and wisdom from that higher dimension back to the physical dimension, planet Earth, and they disseminate it as knowledge, sometimes to such a degree that it becomes a body of literature called a book, and other times it's just statements and verbal communication, verbal messaging, depending on the time of the person's life. And what happens is, when each individual human being transcends, then they raise their level of consciousness. They raise their level of understanding of humanity. And so it's not just about them. What they do is they impart that knowledge back into the world. And so the knowledge of society, of the collective consciousness, as we can call it, let's say of the tribe, of the country, of the nation, of the people, of the world, is raised. So the journey is to develop, evolve our thinking to such a degree that we are enlightened, we transcend, gain enlightenment, gain access to a higher body of knowledge, bring that knowledge back, and then disseminate it. So consciousness, collective consciousness, is raised. So I'm going to sneeze, so forgive me for that, but it's going to happen probably. Excuse me, sorry about that. So what happens is the collective consciousness is raised, and so our journey as human beings is to raise the collective consciousness of society in our present time, in our time, but also to impart that wisdom onto the future generation. So the collective consciousness is not raised only in our time, but in the future generation, in future time, and over time, consciousness is being raised, truth is being expanded. Why that is the case, I don't know, but that I see, if I look at the trajectory, the history, that seems to be the direction that we've been pursuing. And so the interesting thing is that thought is energy. What we think is who we are, and thought is a code. And a flow of thoughts is a pattern, and that becomes a program. and a program is a story. So the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we have in our head, are the stories that inspire us, motivate us, push us, hold us back. The stories in our head is what fire us up positively or negatively. And so the journey is to basically develop, sharpen our mind, so that the stories that we have in our head are not fantasies, but realities, that they are truths, because it's the truths that access the levers, the psychological levers, at the heightened level, because we can access the psychological levers that we have in our brain to maneuver action in our physical body through any thought. It can be positive or negative, but with the truthful thought, with the higher thoughts, with the right stories, we have the exact thought messages to push the levers at the right and precise points to deliver optimum action, optimum reality into the world, most powerful, empowered reality. And that's what we're trying to do. And so all these spiritual teachers have gone, developed their thinking, elevated, transcended, ascended, brought back bodies of knowledge, and those bodies of knowledge are called practices, and they've used those practices by imparting that knowledge to people to allow those people to ascend and transcend and develop their purpose in life, their what I call their hero's journeys, right? You have heard of the story of the hero's journey, that our purpose in life, the reason why we exist, is we're all on a hero's journey. We have to challenge ourselves, and what we have to do is basically we have to use challenge through the physical form, whether it's exercise, career, family, whatever events that are around us. We use the physicality of challenge to provide pressure, to press us, to sharpen us to our truth of who we are. And when we discover through challenge who we are, then the next part of the journey is to once we've discovered our truth, to deliver back, impart back, give back that truth to society, to humanity, to our community, so that that value can be shared. So part A of the journey of living our purpose is to discover our truth through challenge as spiritual beings, using the physical to challenge ourselves. And then the second part is, once we've discovered that truth, to impart that, to deliver that truth back as value to the universe, to raise the body of consciousness in society and humanity. And that's our journey. And so the problem is that religion is sometimes misused, misinterpreted, abused. These spiritual guys, these spiritual teachers that they came as human beings with a message to of no mysticism, of no supernatural in the sense of magic, but in the way that they were able to develop their mind, their thinking, and elevate and transcend and gain wisdom and knowledge from the higher dimension and bring it back. In the same way, they basically instructed us to do it. And what has happened is those in power, the masses, they've basically not gone on that willpower path, that path of sacrifice to develop their thinking, and that body of wisdom that has been provided, that you can only glean through a certain filter, through a certain level of understanding. They haven't been able to understand it at that level, but at a level below, at not the spiritual or the transcendental level, but at the physical level, and they've seen it as being literal and not metaphorical. And so, we have, for example, Christianity, where the misinterpretation is that Jesus is not just a human being, but is God and the Son of God, and that he came to the earth to be a sacrificial lamb, to take on the sins of humanity, and so those who believe in him will be saved, because salvation is now only exclusively through Christ. And so that is an easy message to accept for people who don't want to work hard to develop their thinking, their spiritual state, and evolve their thinking so that they can actually transcend. What they're doing is basically accepting a message and being organized and directed to follow whoever is in power, and so they don't reach that level of transcendence. I'm talking about the message that is here now, and not about the message that Christ himself was the human being delivering as a prophet. And the same with Islam. The message is for those who misinterpret Islam, that one cannot leave the faith. It's blasphemous to leave the faith, and that is wrong as well, because that's a form of trying to control the masses with a physical message, not a transcendental or spiritual message. It's about owning the physical world and not recognizing that there's another dimension that exists. And then the same you have with Judaism, where the Jews proclaim that they are the chosen people, and no one else has that ability to have a relationship with the higher power to their level. And so that's a collective organization of a group of people. With Hinduism, it's about the caste system and keeping people in their stratas and in their place. And so you see that although the teachers came with a particular message, that when that message is available to the people in power or to the masses, then if you're not able to develop your state of thinking to get to a level that you can understand the wisdom of that message, then the message will only be in a literal physical form, and then it's about rules and regulations and not about the purpose of life and why we exist. It's about following the crowd, being herded. And so that's what I think the purpose of life is. I've also put a detailed description of this conversation in the form of a writing, and so you can see that in the description on the video below, and hopefully that will make more structured sense if I haven't presented myself clearly. And I certainly value your feedback, your comments, what you think. Now, one more point I do want to make is that the idea of how to transcend. So we've got the philosophy, we've got the overarching picture that the purpose of life is that we're spiritual beings challenged in the physical as human beings, and our journey is to transcend, to elevate our thinking, to get to a state where we detach ourselves from the physical. While we're still in the physical, we become spiritual entities, we gain knowledge, and our knowledge is then to be instinctual and intuitive, and impart that knowledge back to our community as value, and to raise the collective consciousness of society, in society, and then collectively across generations. That is the journey, but the practice of how to transcend is also a point. And what I'm saying is that it's about willpower, and for us to be able to detach ourselves from the physical, and in that thought access a higher state of thought and get to the spiritual dimension, we have to exercise willpower to hold back our weak thoughts and push through our sharpened, focused spiritual thoughts. So realization is where we have to get to, relinquishing our identity as human beings, limited by pleasure and pain, and moving beyond the natural to the spiritual. So we have to do that through resistance. The way we do that is through resistance. Resistance means that we use challenge of the physical. Let's say it's, we go on a marathon and we do 26 miles, we climb up a mountain, we do something difficult, uncomfortable, uncertain, and that basically is resistance. The challenge is resistance in our mind, and our thoughts have to fight against that uncertainty, that challenge, that resistance. And as they fight, they press against, and our mental muscle is exercised. Our willpower is our mental muscle, and that's exercised, and that's sharpened, and that's made stronger to the point that we are able to get to a state of thinking where we are able to push all other thoughts than the thoughts of us being spiritual beings out of our thinking state. And so what the teachers, the spiritual teachers, all of them were able to do is, through their own form of practice, develop that thinking, develop that resistance in many different forms. But they all are able to, through the different stories, access the psychological levers that make us superior, higher, more evolved human beings. So different stories lead to the same results, and it's the result that matters. And so all religions have a truth. There has to be a truth in every people, because we're all human beings across the world, and it cannot be that one person receives a message and has a pathway to living their life's purpose and somebody else doesn't. There's different ways, but the outcome is the same, which is transcendence and enlightenment and receiving of wisdom and peace and contentment. So that's where I am right now. That's where my conclusion is right now. Let me know your thoughts, and I wish you guys a wonderful day.
Hey team, how are you? It's day 17 of the 30-day challenge. So we've gone past halfway. I just done a 4.5 minute jog. Complete waste of time. I definitely need to run more, and it's because I haven't got a compelling reason why I'm doing it, although obviously the reason should be health and fitness, but that isn't motivating me right now. And I'm just trying to figure out everything. I'm just trying to figure out everything. I just figured out why the video sometimes cuts out. I accidentally pressed the side button to stop instead of not touching that button when I adjust my hand. Anyway, so something radical's got to happen. It's day 17. I know when I did my 30-day challenge last time, it was between day 18 and 21 that something just clicked, something changed, where I was very comfortable with the whole idea of jogging. On this occasion, I definitely feel comfortable with getting out. I don't have that resistance to get out, but I do have a resistance to keep grinding, to keep jogging. So I've got to figure that out, got to focus on that. And it's been an interesting day today, a little bit quiet, not as great as I would have wanted it to be, not as productive. You know, sometimes we're up, sometimes we're down. It's all about feelings and emotions. And, you know, we've got to try and put in practices into place that circumvent our emotions and feelings, and put in structures to keep going, even when things aren't in our way, in our direction. But anyway, I'm going to bid you a good night, and we'll catch up with you later. Bye now.